Hi, everyone. We'll get started soon. People will be coming in, and I do have a long introduction to get through because of how special this occasion is. So, why don't I get started? Welcome to the Bibliographical Society of America's public event for Katie Mitchell's new book, Prose to the People, A Celebration of Black Bookstores. My name is Kinohi Nishikawa, and I'm the president of the BSA. So, as I said, today is a special occasion, and it's special for three reasons. First and foremost, we get to celebrate Katie's book, published by Clarkson Potter, a division of Penguin Random House. Katie Mitchell is a storyteller and bookseller based in Atlanta. Her online and pop up Black bookstore, Good Books, has been featured in stories in the New York Times, NBC, NPR, PBS, and a host of other venues. In 2023, Katie earned a Dorothy Porter Wesley Fellowship with the BSA in recognition of the on the ground research she conducted to write Prose to the People. The New York Times, in its review of the book, notes that the result of Katie's 2 years collecting photographs and testimonials from sellers and patrons alike, quote, is both a collage and an encyclopedia of Black art and Black pride, a timeline of activism, a reading list, and even a soundtrack to accompany it all, end quote. So it's not only this, I would like to add that the book is lavishly illustrated and designed in such a way that gives you a visually dynamic tour of the stories Katie writes about. Not since Toni Morrison's The Black Book has a book combined Black history and Black memory so deftly in its pages, not just a matter of documentation, but as a matter of the reading experience itself. So today is also a special occasion because we get to celebrate the BSA's role in helping resource Katie's research into the history of Black bookstores in America. This is why today's event is part of the BSA's spring fundraising sprint. If you're inspired by the kind of research into books and book culture that you're about to hear today, please take a moment to donate to us through the email you receive confirming your attendance or at bibsocamer.org. Finally, we get to celebrate community, which is a key takeaway of Prose to the People and a core value of the BSA's membership. To that end, Katie will be in conversation with a distinguished guest who shares her and our love for books of all kinds. An award-winning journalist with over 30 years of experience in the news industry, Alvin Patrick is executive producer of the Race and Culture Unit and content development and integration for CBS News. He has had a hand in producing streaming and televised series on Pope Francis and on the Tulsa Race Massacre, as well as stories for shows like 60 Minutes, CBS Mornings, and 48 Hours. A seven-time Emmy nominee, Alvin has shared 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards with colleagues at CBS. Balanced with this professional success is Alvin's love for books, in particular, first editions of African American literature. He delivered a widely viewed Grolier Club talk on his collection in 2023, and I'm comfortable in saying that, like the collectors before him, Arturo Schomburg, Dorothy Porter Wesley, Charles Blockson, Alvin shares Katie's love for the booksellers who have an eye for books that sometimes go overlooked by the mainstream. So Katie and Alvin will dialogue for 30 to 35 minutes, after which I will coordinate the question and answer period for them. You at any point are welcome to ask a question by clicking the Q&A button on your Zoom window and posting it there. I will ask both of them the questions after they're finished dialoguing. So without further ado, I now turn it over to Katie and Alvin. Thank you for joining us today. And congratulations, Katie, on Prose to the People.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Kinohi, thank you so much. And Katie, I mean, this is a special, special book. And
Thank you.
I'm trying, I'm trying to keep my journalist hat on, but I'm way too much of a fanboy of this book. It is so visually stimulating and so educational. You did a wonderful job. So before we start, I just want to say that and give you, all the props that you deserve.
Thank you so much.
I've had a great time getting to know you, and I just, let's just start at the beginning. What inspired you to write Prose to the People, and what was behind the design decisions that makes this such a visually stimulating book?
Yeah, I had a deep curiosity. I had seen how transformative Black bookstores have been in my life as a bookseller and also as a customer. And I found it deeply ironic that the story of the Black bookstore hadn't been told in book form yet, because they hold our histories, they hold our stories, but no one had told the story and shared the history of Black bookstores in a single volume yet. So that was what inspired me to go on the journey of creating Prose to the People. And with the design decisions, it's, bursting with pictures and scans of ephemera. And I wanted the reader to feel what I felt reading Prose to the People as what I felt when I walked into a Black bookstore. So it's vibrant. You see art, you see all the different covers. You're not just hearing from one person. And so that's what went into making it an anthology. Hearing from other people who had their own relationship with Black bookstores was really important to me. So I just wanted it to mimic the bookstore in a lot of ways. And we were talking earlier, and you said you felt like you had visited the stores, and that was really the purpose. It was a high compliment when you said that, because a lot of the stories that are chronicled in the book aren't there anymore. So I really was deep in the archives trying to figure out, what did it sound like? What did it smell like? What were the conversations? And then bringing that to life on the page so that we could visit them across space and time.
And anyone who's a book lover knows that smell of a bookstore, whether it be the dusty old antiquarian bookstore or a fresh new one. It's just something that never leaves us. So one of the beautiful things about this book is that the foreword is written by the late great Nikki Giovanni. How did that come about?
So it came about from my research. When I was doing research, I was talking to booksellers of stores that are still open, stores that have since closed, and every bookseller who'd been around, I'd say from between the 60s and the early 2000s, had a Nikki Giovanni story, and they were all positive. And, getting to know these people, they had no problem telling me negative stories about anyone. So when I was like, oh, Nikki Giovanni really made an impact on all these stores, and I thought it was only right that she have the first word in the first book about Black bookstores. So I wrote to her, I shared that with her. I also shared just what her writing has meant to me over the years. She's one of those people that you feel like you have known your whole life just because you've been familiar with their writing your whole life. But I didn't know her personally. I waited in line to take pictures with her, like, thousands of other people. But I just shared that with her, and she was very gracious. She thanked me for the invitation and wrote her essay, and was also very gracious when I gave her notes on her essay. So it was a, interesting experience. But
Wait. You gave Nikki Giovanni notes on her essay?
And I was like, I want to know more. Give me some details.
All right. Okay. That was a lot, but okay. All right.
But I will say,
Yeah.
In that spirit, I think working with her, also working with Pearl Clegg, who has portions of in the book, they showed me what it means to be a good elder, working with these people, because I think she saw the tenacity and I think also the audacity of creating a project like that. And she was very open to what I had to say. It wasn't like, oh, who are you? Like, I'm Nikki Giovanni. I'm not going to take your notes. She was a great elder. And I think now that she's transitioned, she's also showing me what it means to be a great ancestor, because lending her name and her voice to this project is putting it in rooms in publications that it probably wouldn't have been otherwise. So she's, great all around, and I'm really grateful that she's part of the project.
That's wonderful. There's nothing better than meeting a hero and the hero lives up to being the hero.
Yeah.
It's never great when it's the opposite. So,
Right.
so I know you spent a lot of time in New York City. For the record, you profile 55 bookstores in the book, right? And but a lot of your time was spent in New York. I believe 12 of the 55 bookstores are in New York City, both past and present. Tell us a little bit about the New York City booksellers' role in sort of the Black bookstore tradition.
Yeah, I mean, it starts in New York City. In 1830s, there was David Ruggles. He had D. Ruggles Books, which was in the heart of New York City. He sold anti-slavery and abolitionist texts, some which he printed himself and was distributing. So David Ruggles is now celebrated as the father of Black bookstores in the United States. But during the time, what he was doing was frowned upon. He was jailed for what he did. He helped free Frederick Douglass and other fugitive slaves. His house was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and he was a prominent abolitionist. His shop was set on fire in a suspected case of arson. So from the very beginning, what we see with D. Ruggles is that in this country, contraband is often seen as guns or alcohol or drugs. But for Black people, it has been and continues to be books. And so when we look at the history of Black bookstores, it starts at David Ruggles, and he shows us and sets the tone for Black bookstores being sites for liberation in the United States.
That's wonderful. So tell me a little bit about Louis Michaud. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. His name properly, his last name properly. He has a quotation that I think sort of encapsulates everything, and Nikki Giovanni ended her forward with it. And the quote is, "Black is beautiful, but knowledge is power."
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about him and this powerful saying that actually says so much about the history of Black people in this country.
Yeah, so Louis Michaud, he started his bookstore during the Great Depression, and he was a collector. He had books from the Harlem Renaissance, and he had the aphorisms. You talk about that quote. He had a lot of quotes. And so in the book, I break down his profile with his quotes, because he had a lot of sayings, and he was this fireball of a personality. I think when you think about the eccentric bibliophile, Louis Michaud is what people are thinking of. So he was the self-appointed headquarters of the Garvey Back to Africa movement. I spent a lot of times in the archive looking at historical Black newspapers, but with Michaud, he stood out because the white newspapers were also covering him, and they called him, a mean leprechaun because he was a short guy, and they were talking about him, but he just had that reaction from people, and I think it was he was one of my favorite booksellers to learn about, because I think when you're that polarizing, you're doing something right. When your enemies that, don't want Black people to read, who want Black people to be surveilled, don't like you that much, you're doing something right. And then on the other hand, Harlem loved him. He was in Harlem for around 40 years. His store eventually closed because they were building a State Department building, which closed a lot of Black bookstores in the area. And people rallied for him to stay. They had protests, they raised money. But in the end, he said, "It's my baby, but it's gotten too heavy for me. I have to let it go." But he did live long enough to see a book fair named in his honor where Black authors were celebrated. And he remains one of the greatest booksellers, in my opinion, that we've had in the United States. And when you look at Louis Michaud, you can kind of see the family tree of what he inspired. So you'll learn about Paul Coates, who is, the father of Ta-Nehisi Coates, the former owner of the Black Book in Baltimore and the founder of Black Classic Press. He would drive up to Harlem to get advice from Michaud and try to buy books from him. And he said he was bad at negotiating, but Michelle would just let him win and be like, hey, take the books, and do your thing at your bookstore. And there's countless of other booksellers who did the same thing. So I really love seeing how these New York booksellers were not just in New York, but really their influence spread all across the country, whether it was in Baltimore, whether it was in Atlanta and DC, or all the way to on the other side of the country in LA and Oakland.
I mean, look, I am claiming my New York City bias. I think New York is the greatest city in the world, but it does one of the things that makes New York City great is the Schomburg. And I know you spent a lot of time there, and I think it was perhaps your first time in the archives. Tell me a little bit about that experience for those who have not been to the Schomburg, what it's like to sort of walk into a place of that has so much of our history.
Yeah, I mean, it was my first time in the archives and I was super nervous because, New York is expensive. I was like, I'm coming here from Atlanta. I need to be really tight with my time. So I reached out to the librarians and said like, hey, this is what I'm working on. Can you help me? So they were doing some like pre-reporting for me, which was amazing. And then I also had the opportunity to just meet with them the summer prior. And I just told them like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a project like this. And they took me aside and said, that's really cool. We just acquired the papers of a Black bookseller in New York, but that's all we can tell you. And I was like, no, you need to tell me who it is. You need to give me their contact information. So, they whispered it to me. I reached out to who became Glenderlyn Johnson, who had Black Books Plus. And for those who haven't been in the archives before, the processing times can be years to get it where researchers have access to it. So I reached out to Glenderlyn and she said I could look at her papers of her bookstore before she gave it to the Schomburg. And that led to one of my favorite profiles in the book, Black Books Plus. We were like in her storage unit and she was like showing me notes from the 90s, like Jesse Jackson is so rude. I can't believe he was on his cellular phone while he was supposed to be signing books. But then she also showed me this very beautiful note from an incarcerated customer that said, my body may be in prison, but my mind is free. And that was thanks to the books that she was providing him and his cellmate. So the Schomburg, just in that like little bit of like whispering to me on the side, not alone being in the archives and being able to see everyone's papers. In the introduction, I give my definition of what a Black bookstore is, and I take it from Rosemary M. Stevenson, who says a Black bookstore doesn't mean that it's just owned by a Black person, but they're specializing in Black books. So having that direction changed the course of Prose to the People because it really let me narrow it down and look at the stores that were more mission focused rather than just being owned by Black people.
Yeah, just I can't say enough about the Schomburg, which of course is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, and there have been so many events, and there will be throughout the summer. What did it feel like when you stepped into that Langston Hughes lobby?
I mean, Langston Hughes, also one of those people that you feel like because you're like, this is my buddy. I know all his work from when I was a kid. And even the title, Prose to the People, is borrowed from a section in one of his autobiographies. And the section was called Poetry to the People. And he was going around the South sharing poems with people who, may have never heard a poet recite their poems before. So just being in that space and knowing what he's contributed to my life and that I borrowed the title from him, it was, very surreal.
Nice. Kind of like a raisin in the sun. Okay, I hear you. So tell me, we can get out of New York now and sort of talk about the different sections that you've got. You have chapter 1 is in the Northeast, chapter 2 is the DMV, chapter 3 is the South, chapter 4 is the Midwest, chapter 5 is the West. Can you tell me? So why don't we go to the DMV? What bookstore from the DMV stood out to you?
Definitely Drum and Spear, which was the preeminent Black bookstore in the 1960s. It was founded by SNCC activists, so Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee activists. So they're very young when they started it. So a lot of them are still alive. And I got to break bread with them. One lives in the Bay Area. I went to her house and spent a couple of days just learning from her. She has an antiquarian bookstore now called Oasis in the Diaspora, but just learning from them and learning about the surveillance that they faced being in DC. They're right in the FBI's backyard. She's Daphne Muse is the woman I'm referring to. She said like Hoover hated us, and they were just following her back and forth from her apartment to the store and really trying to get them caught up on something. They were also victims of arson. They had police shooting into their store. The FBI just coming in and throwing books off the shelves. So seeing them endure that, I think, and hearing what they have done since, and just their commitment to the movement and the struggle and how it manifests in different ways really put a battery in my back while doing this project. And I was like, if they face all that, I can, face whatever difficulties I am facing in writing and researching this book to like make sure that the story's out there.
And we should mention you are a bookseller.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about your personal journey as a bookseller.
Yeah, so me and my mom, Catherine, started in 2019. We started Good Books because I was in my like first big girl apartment after college, and my friends came over and they saw my bookshelf, which I thought was just a regular bookshelf. And they were like, "Oh, who is this? Who is that?" And it was like Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou. And I was like, "What? I've never heard of these people." And these are college educated people. But I went to a school that focused on engineering. And so I found that a lot of people kind of lost their love for reading the older we got. So after elementary school, it just like wasn't fun for people. So my bookstore really focused on reintroducing people into the love of reading, and then also focusing on Black books in particular.
That's great. That's great. So it was sort of a natural that you would be interested in Black bookstores.
Absolutely.
So tell me about a bookstore of note that was in the South.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite is For Keeps, which is on Auburn Avenue. And for those who aren't familiar with Auburn Avenue, it's like the Black street in Atlanta. Dr. Martin Luther King's childhood home is on Auburn Ave. The Auburn Avenue Research Library, Apex Museum, a lot of Black stuff on that street. But her store is an antiquarian rare book bookstore. And what I really love about For Keeps is she has books from like the Harlem Renaissance. It was like Langston Hughes touched this book, and she just has it out on the table where anyone can come in and see it. And being someone who's been in the archives, I know that a lot of the times there are barriers for people seeing books like this. You have to have an ID, you have to make an appointment, you have to have like kind of a good reason for wanting to see this stuff. But at Rosa Duffy is her name, at her space, anyone, despite their education level, socioeconomic status, can come and interact with these books. And I think that's a really special thing. And I see a lot of people kind of following in her footsteps. Like, yeah, we want to have kind of a non-capitalist way of interacting with these books too, like whether it's a lending library or just things that are simply not for sale that anyone in the community can come and look at.
Interesting. So the Midwest, that was the smallest section of the book, a bookstore of note there.
One that I really enjoyed learning about is Vaughn's Bookstore, which was owned by Edward Vaughn, and that was in Detroit. And Edward Vaughn actually spent the last years of his life in Atlanta, so I got to know him and his family really well. And one of the things that I didn't expect from this journey of Prose to the People is the relationships that I built. I don't see myself as a journalist, so I was in everybody's business, like, oh, what are your grandkids up to? Like, oh, how'd that eye appointment go? So it wasn't just subjects. I was like, oh, these are my friends and my family now. And so I ended up going to his funeral in Dothan, Alabama, driving to his funeral. It's just something you wouldn't expect from, writing a book. You're at this person's funeral and grieving with their family. So that was one that's really close to my heart. He also experienced surveillance and harassment from the police during the Detroit rebellions. The police firebombed and flooded his store, and he got support from all around the world as far as China, people supporting him, sending him money and books so that he can continue to be a hub for the civil rights movement, and so Black people in Detroit can get books.
So just as a point of clarification, part of being a journalist is being all up in people's business. Just FYI. The West. The West is a rather long section. You can, if you have one or two bookstores, and I know there's such a rich history out there, especially after the Great Migration.
Mhm.
So a couple bookstores there.
So the oldest still running bookstore is in Oakland. It's called Marcus Books. And started in the 60s with Julian and Ray Richardson. And the energy there was so amazing. When I went there, it was just bursting with bugs, bursting with people. Like a former mayor came in just randomly. Like there were little kids, old folks, like everybody was in there. So I really enjoyed being there. And I got to know the granddaughter of the founders. So she also has an essay in the book talking about her grandmother. And I thought that was a really nice way to include voices from the family. And, I have Nikki Giovanni in the book, I have PSA Lehman in the book, but I also wanted to include people that I'm more so introducing them who are amazing writers, have an amazing story, but if not for a little bit of research, you might not know who they are. So that was a fun one, getting to know the family and learning about their store. And then LA was the city that really surprised me, because I had never been to LA before going to for the book, and I was in Chicago at the Newberry Library, and I had just went in there randomly, and I was like, "Hey, I'm working on this project. Can you help me?" And they gave me some stuff, and I was looking through it, and I found a bookstore called the Hugh Gordon Bookstore, and I was like, "I've never heard of this store." And they have such a beautiful story. Hugh Gordon, his family, I believe his parents were enslaved by the governor of Georgia, and his family took the Great Migration journey all the way to LA. And he worked as a janitor, and he was also a collector of Black books. And in his will, he wrote that he wanted his friend to start a Black bookstore for the city. And so the Hugh Gordon Bookstore is named after this man who died. And, his last wish was for the city to have a Black bookstore. And I found an article about one of the shopkeepers teaching a Black man from Mississippi how to read right there in the store, because they saw him staring at the books and was like, "Oh, do you want to buy this book?" And he's like, "Can you teach me how to read?" And so seeing the city be a beneficiary of this man's commitment to Black literacy was a beautiful thing. And just being in the archives and just letting it flow and letting things find me. The book was much smaller in my proposal, but when I was finding these things, I was like, I have to let people know about this bookstore and that bookstore. In LA, I think surprised me the most with their rich history of Black bookstores.
Yeah, LA, I mean, as an East Coaster, LA, from a Black art perspective, Black literature perspective, continues to surprise and delight. I think I'm not quite sure people understand, that sort of migration from Louisiana and Texas, and a lot of quite interesting folks went. Um, you know, I just have a couple more questions. Nikki Giovanni talked about the fact that, or I think it was in her forward, but it may have been in your introduction. So forgive me if I mix it up, but talked about how important Black bookstores are to the Black community. And I think either you or she said perhaps second only to the Black church. Tell me about the place that the Black bookstore holds in the Black community.
I mean, they're one of the longest standing institutions, right? They've been here since the 1830s, and some come and some go. But I think that's the amazing thing about institutions. Like one leaving or one popping up doesn't stop it as a whole. And even saying it's second only to the Black church, a lot of Black churches started Black bookstores. So here in Atlanta, we have the Shrine of the Black Madonna, which was started in Detroit, came to Atlanta in the mid 70s, and they have an amazing bookstore also in Houston. So Houston and Atlanta have Shrine of the Black Madonna bookstores. And I think with the Black bookstore too, they're connected to these other institutions, other Black institutions. And so I think that's what also makes their staying power so powerful. Even Black colleges, before I think the 1990s, a lot of the HBCUs had independent Black bookstores, not the Barnes and Noble Black bookstores in there, but independent Black bookstores on their campuses. So seeing people who are affiliated with libraries, colleges, churches start Black bookstores, and then vice versa, the flow of information just keeps going, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And I'm glad there's a book about it now.
No, no, just wonderful. Okay, so before I ask you my last question, is there is there a favorite story that you have from the book or from your travels that you want to, talk about and let our audience know about?
I think one theme that kept coming up from space, time, was the connection with movements, and especially folks who are incarcerated. And when I think of like businesses, you don't really see a grocery store or a fabric store having like a prison ministry, but these Black bookstores were really concerned with people on the inside, people who have been disappeared from our communities, and even the non-political bookstores like Black Books Plus having that incarcerated customer write to Glenderlyn Johnson. But then there's also Paul Coates, who had the Black Book, whose sole mission, or part of its sole mission, was to make sure that incarcerated Panthers had books to read. So I think seeing Black bookstores at the vanguard of these social movements, in very progressive leaning spaces, was something that was maybe not surprising, but really refreshing to see, and see that it's still going on now. Speaking of LA, we have No Name's Radical Hood Library and their book club. They're sending books to incarcerated folks for free and making sure that they're in dialogue with people on the outside.
Yeah, it's you know, books have been so important to so many leaders. I mean, you think of the incarcerated and you think of, Malcolm X and sort of the education that happened for him that sort of turned his life around. Many, people were self-taught, and it was the power of the book. And I I had the honor of of doing a profile of Cornell West for 60 Minutes a few years back, and he talked about how important the sort of traveling library in his Sacramento neighborhood was, the bookmobile.
Mm-hmm.
He was known as that little, the 10-year-old kid or who read every book in the bookmobile, and they never had enough books for him. So just the power of the book, whether it be a library or a bookstore, is
Mm-hmm.
so important to our story. So final question, why do you think this book is important now, in the moment that we're in?
Yeah, I think now we're facing a lot of book bans. They're disproportionately impacting Black books, books with Black characters and authored by Black people. And I think those book bans really go back to what we see with David Ruggles, with Drum and Spear, with the Black Book, the surveillance, the harassment. These bookstores weren't being harassed because they were making a lot of money. They're being harassed. The stores were being firebombed. The owners were being framed and sentenced to 31 to 41 years by all white juries, not because they were businesses, but because they were providing Black literature, because they were concerned of the life of the mind of the Black America, and because that is seen by a lot of people who don't want to see a wholesome life for Black people in this country as a threat. Um, and so I think that same line of thinking goes all the way back to when we first landed here. Frederick Douglass has that line in one of his autobiographies that when his master found out that he was reading, he said he can't be a slave if he knows how to read. So I think when we open Prose and we see all the lessons from our elders and our ancestors, we can see what they did and how they moved forward and are handing us the baton to keep going, and to how to face this oppression and not lie down in the face of these book bans, in the face of, the Librarian of Congress being fired for no reason but being a Black person. These institutions that once banned our bodies are now trying to ban our books, and we have to stand up.
Thank you. Well said, Katie. Well said. So I want everyone to know that Katie will be taking her show on the road, as well as her book on the road. She'll be in Los Angeles on May 17th at the Reparations Club Book Talk. She'll also be right here at the Grolier in New York City on June 13th. We can't wait to have you here. And then the great Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. You'll be there on June 14th for more celebrations of their 100th anniversary, which is just wonderful. And so I will throw it back over to Kinohi for any questions that he or our wonderful audience may have.
Thank you, Alvin. That was a wonderful set of questions that you posed to Katie, and you touched on everything from design to the organization of the book to the many stories that populate its pages. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask the questions that we already see in the Q&A chat, and these will be for you, Katie, but Alvin, please pop in if you have anything to add. First, this comes from Aaron. And Alvin, I might need your help here since you have a physical copy of the book. Aaron asks, can you talk about the end papers in Prose to the People? They are drop dead gorgeous. I've never seen anything like them. How did they come about? What were the scans that were involved in putting this together?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So I wanted the book, like I said, to be bursting with details. And so with the end papers, they actually come from the Atlanta Daily World archive, and they're headlines about Black bookstores and Black books. So I just wanted to have a nod to Atlanta, my hometown, but also give the reader just one more thing to see. I heard people saying that they were like looking up the headlines and seeing what the news article said about those particular headlines. So yeah, just another design detail. I found it's like, hey, these end papers can't be blank. Let's put these headlines in there. Yeah, I see Walter Mosley at a bookstore, and
that was great.
Yeah, I love that because, oh my goodness, yep.
Walter Mosley without the hat.
I know, that's why everyone said, I can't believe he doesn't have his hat. Hopefully he wasn't mad when he saw that.
Walter Mosley, one of the Angelinos, right? Who likes to frequent Black bookstores,
mm-hmm.
and who has his own work sold in Black bookstores, and yep. One of whose characters, Socrates Fortlow, is a bookstore owner.
Right.
I love that sort of explanation, Katie, not only because of the personal connection to Atlanta, but you implicitly encourage us to see the interconnection of institutions, Black bookstores and the Black press.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is interconnected. Everything goes together. Church, press, bookstores, schools. So that's just another instance of this. We have a question from Michael, who has a kind of two-part question for you.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael's curious if you found during your research the presence of white booksellers who over the years were important in fostering or collaborating with Black bookstore owners. Was there a sense of solidarity that you saw among some of these booksellers? And as a follow-up or a kind of adjunct to that, were there white customers and book purchasers who were especially supportive of the mission of Black bookstores? Right? This idea that maybe there's a story here about interracial solidarity and civil rights movement hidden in bookstores themselves.
Yeah, I found some stories like that. I think the indie booksellers in particular, because the big box booksellers, of course, were stealing displays and titles from the Black booksellers. But the indie booksellers, I think one example was Third World Ethnic Books, which was in West Adams, LA neighborhood. And so Mamie Clayton was a librarian at UCLA, and then she went to work at Universal Books to learn the trade. And when Universal Books folded, she got all the Black books that were in their catalog and started her bookstore. So that's one example I can think of. And then I know now in present day, white customers have, summer of 2020 definitely bought a lot of Black books, and some of them are continuing to do that. Some of them are not. But yeah, definitely in more contemporary times, I learned more about what the customers were doing.
Terrific. William asks, given the history and power of the Black bookstores, which Prose to the People has brought forward, Could you name a city or two where you'd like to see such a bookstore today? You've gone all over the country and you have a pretty good sense in your head of what came before and what's here still.
Mhm.
Is there a place, a city or two where you think something like this could really be seated?
Yeah, I think Harlem surprisingly doesn't have a Black bookstore now. And at one point they were up and down 125th Street, across the street from each other, side by side. So I would love to see the resurgence of Harlem as Black Mecca when it comes to bookstores. So that's one that I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, I feel like, I don't
That's
know, I haven't been to every state. So that's just one that I'm thinking of right now. Yeah, did you have
actually
one,
it's
Alvin?
crazy. It's kind of crazy to think that Harlem doesn't have a Black bookstore. It may be because of the long shadow that the Schomburg cat,
Well,
but
yeah, they have their indie bookstore, the Schomburg Shop. But
yeah,
yeah, I'd like to see like a radical
yeah,
bookstore in Harlem.
I hear you. Kanohi, can I just interject and say what a wonderful, we're talking about this moment and Katie's book happening in this moment. Last week there was quite a moment for African American authors. The Pulitzer prizes came out, and Percival Everett won in the fiction category for James. Brandon Jacobs Jenkins won in the drama category for Purpose. For those of you who haven't been to Broadway and here in New York, it's playing right now. It's unbelievable play. Etta Fields Black won in the history category for her book about Harriet Tubman. And there was also a special citation given to the National Association of Black Journalists co-founder, the late Chuck Stone. So it's really been, even in this moment of turmoil when it comes to our arts and educational institutions, these things still rise. And that's not even to mention the Met Gala, super fine tailoring Black style and dandyism that looked at 30 years of Black fashion. So we are in a moment of, I don't know whether the word is resistance, but a moment of celebration still.
I I love how you put that, Alvin, because it reminds us that these traditions are rich and are sustained. And it's very important to keep that in mind, no matter what's going on in the world. And I love the photo you shared online of your picture with Dr. Hayden. So let's share the very good that comes out of these traditions. Um, Thank you for that reminder. And I echo your sense of irony about Harlem not having um, a bookstore. On the one hand, a sign of perhaps gentrification. On the other, on the other, it, an encouragement for us to look at where books are being sold, perhaps in fold-up tables or things of that nature. But at any rate, a really good conversation. Laura says, congratulations and thank you so much for this book. Can you talk about how you were able to capture the space of the bookstore as a gathering place, both through the visuals and through your stories? She says this is such an important part of the book. So how did you capture the space, the architecture of some of these wonderful stores?
Yeah, so for the photo shoots that I did in each city, I asked them to bring like their favorite customers, their friends, family. I talked about For Keeps in Atlanta, and I love that spread in particular because the first page, before I even say a word about For Keeps, is Rosa Duffy's grandmother, who is a civil rights activist from Minnesota. And she comes to the store on the weekends and just having that intergenerational feel. So Rosa's grandmother and then her friends like hanging out on the couch and like reading and passing books back and forth. I wanted to capture like what is the space like on its like funnest, most vibrant day. And as you said, Alvin, like we're celebrating still. So I wanted to make sure that the book wasn't somber. It was like this is a fun time. It's a fun experience. Like come to these stores. And the second part was both through visuals and stories. Yeah, so not just focusing on the owner or one particular story, but I wanted to get the perspectives of lots of people and then incorporate those in different ways. So in the For Keeps profile, I just kind of Rosa is also a visual artist. So I talk about her as, you know, also a bookseller, an archivist, but also an artist, kind of like creating this masterpiece and all the different people who are making up this collage of beauty that is For Keeps. So I talk about the houseless trumpet player who comes in to use the bathroom and gets water. I talk about the film student, her grandmother, the MacArthur genius, who I leave unnamed, but I'm referring to Ta-Nehisi Coates. You know, the mayor comes through. So it's just like it's a motley crew. And I wanted to show that both in the visuals and in the text. So that's one example. But with the Marcus store, not just speaking to the owner, but speaking with the granddaughter who has her own perspective and her memories of growing up and living in the store and all the people who came, and then connecting the story of Marcus and the gentrification they face with what James Baldwin saw in his Harlem. So there's just a lot of things going on with the Black bookstore. So I want to capture that in that way.
You know, I have to echo Alvin here. You are a natural journalist because, you know, unlike a lot of scholars who are focused on single authorship in writing the monograph, you have lent your voice to all the people you met, and you have created a choral effect in bringing out their stories, surfacing their stories, such that, with regard to Laura's question, you fill in the space not with your own voice or ruminations, but with theirs. Mm. That's really quite remarkable, and I really want to commend you, Katie. Anthropologists are the closest scholars kind of get to this kind of writing, but of course it's par for the course, right, Alvin, in journalism. I'm really just stunned by that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I need you to write one of my blurbs, put on the back of the book.
Journalism is first, the first rough draft of history. So,
and testimonials, I think, is the perfect way to describe a lot of the voices who appear in your book. Nahid also sends congratulations on this fabulous new book, which Nahid has ordered on bookshop.org. The question is, after researching so many bookstores, what advice do you have for newer bookstores and people who are thinking of getting into bookselling?
Yeah. Hi, Nahid. Nahid and I did a fellowship together about antiquarian books. One thing that I found that I think works really well is niching down. And so with Black bookstores, they're often put on these lists like the, 50 Black bookstores in the United States or whatever. But I found that the ones that are really succeeding know their audience, they know their personality, they know their politics, and they are focused on that. So, with Rosa, she's focused on rare books For Keeps. But there's another bookstore in the Atlanta area called Yes Please, and they're focused on healing and womanism. And so they have a community garden. They're doing making tinctures from the herbs that they're growing. They have muscadine wine, and they're having dinners and drinking the muscadine wine, cheersing to, Black womanhood. So the people that are really into that stuff are able to find that bookstore and, champion it in a way that I think general bookstores aren't really getting those, diehard fans and customers in that way. So if I were to, start another bookstore, I think that's something that I would do differently, or advice I would give to someone who's interested in starting a bookstore, especially in a space that has, a couple other bookstores, just to niche down and really focus on what you are into.
That's terrific. And really, that response gets at the sort of grassroots nature of this. Know your audience. It's not a top-down big box philosophy, but one that really emerges organically from community. And it reminds me of your point about HBCUs. The Black bookstore I got to know best was based in Durham, North Carolina, and served North Carolina Central University for many, many years. And Bruce Bridges, the proprietor, knew his audience, he knew his customers, he knew the students of Durham who bought all their textbooks and pleasure reading from his store. And this, I think, is a really great way of entering into any bookstore and almost immediately you get a sense of how they're curating for real living people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Not widgets, not data points, but living people who they know face to face.
Absolutely. And I love seeing the growth that customers get from having that relationship with their booksellers. I talk about it in the Drum and Spear profile. People come in and they kind of want to read, the trashy books and they'll sell them to them. But then the next time they come in, it's like, oh, how about you read about, what's going on in the third world, what's going on, like what history was related to DC. So kind of taking your customers on that journey where they trust you to give you those recommendations, and you can grow that way too.
One comment and then a final question before I turn things back to Alvin. Lisa just wants to say thank you, Katie, for your special moment in remembering David Ruggles, whose shop was burned down for selling and printing his Mirror of Liberty, and carrying forward the torch of his memory into calling for a revival or even just an expansion of Black radical bookstores, I think is what Lisa wants to recognize here.
Thank you, Lisa. And of course, Lisa is the one who made the Dorothy Porter Fellowship possible. So thank you for that too.
Thank you for that recognition. Lisa's entirely too humble for me to do that, but thank you, Katie, for seeing that. Last but not least, from the audience, Patrick asks, for those booksellers who are no longer in business, can you talk a little bit about the records you found? Did many booksellers leave physical archives, or was it really just piecing together their histories through newspaper stories?
It was definitely the latter. The only kind of complete archive I found was from Black Books Plus, and she was a former Schomburg librarian. So that makes sense why she was so organized and had that just at the ready for me. But a lot of it was archives, newspapers. I had this instance where I was at a completely separate thing. It was like a podcasting workshop. And they asked, like, what is the thing you're most proud of? And I had just turned in like my first draft of Prose to the People. And I was going to say something else, but I was like, let me just say this. Let me humble brag for a second. And I was like, oh, I just turned in the first draft of my book. It's about Black bookstores. And so someone in that workshop was asking me about it. And I was telling them it's going to have pictures in it. And I was like, but I'm having a really hard time finding pictures of Liberation bookstore in Harlem. And she's like, oh, really? Because that's my auntie. I'll bring you pictures tomorrow. And so, yeah. So it was just kind of like the way things were finding me. It was very piecemeal. It was very like you have to let people know what's going on, and then people coming to you and helping in that way. But yeah, I would love a complete archive. When I was just about finished with the book, I found that a bookstore in Harlem called Tree of Life, that man's archive had just been sold to the Schomburg. But once it's sold, you can't look at it until it's processed. So I wasn't able to look at it as much as I would have liked to. But I'm excited to see it once it is available to the public.
Thank you so much. I'll round things out, but Alvin, before I do, I want to give you the last few words.
All I would like to say is I will paraphrase Louis Michel, Black is beautiful, but knowledge is power. And I think we should just all thank Katie for giving us the beauty and the power that is Prose to the People.
Thank
you.
You're here.
Thank you.
Here. When our erstwhile executive director, Aaron, says that this is just a reminder for all of us that Katie's approach, this method, really highlights something remarkable about the BSA Fellowship Program. It's not just for scholars who are writing articles, that while very learned, might have a readership that's very narrow. This is exactly the kind of work that we hope to resource and promote throughout the world, because this, along with peer-reviewed scholarship, that's what sort of sustains our memory of books sung and unsung, and book cultures sung and unsung. And really that matter a lot to all of us. Katie, I want to commend not just the product of Prose to the people, but the process, how you got there, because conversation has really taught me a lot about how to do what I do, how to do what we all do better. And that involves more collaboration, more talking, more sharing, because who knows when you're going to be talking to the niece of the proprietor of the Liberator Bookshop.
Right. Not me.
And Alvin, I think all of us in the webinar join me in thanking you for your expert sort of tour of the book, virtual as it may have been. So thank you, Alvin, too, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
With that, I want to close this webinar. Thank you once again to Katie Mitchell. Thank you once again to Alvin Patrick for hosting this wonderful conversation. Stay in touch with the Bibliographical Society of America and go out and buy Prose to the People. You won't regret it. Get your physical copy now. Thank you and good night, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.